Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tammy Stacklehouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tammy Stacklehouse, and this is episode 173. If you have ever felt tired, foggy, and flared up when the seasons change, or the clocks, then you are not alone. Shifts in light can disrupt your circadian rhythm. That's your body's internal clock. This rhythm regulates when you feel tired or awake and even influences your mood, energy, pain levels, and focus. When it gets out of sync, we feel it. That's why I am excited about today's conversation with Professor Leon Lack, one of the world's leading experts on sleep, circadian rhythm, and light therapy. He's also the co-inventor of the Retimer light therapy glasses, which is one of my favorite things for 2025. We're talking about why light affects us so deeply, how to help your body clock reset, and how bright light therapy can support better sleep, steadier mood, and more energy all year long. Now, let me introduce you to our guest. Professor Leon Lack received his first degree from Stanford University and his PhD from the University of Adelaide. A pioneer in sleep and circadian rhythm research, he has taught and conducted studies at Flinders University since 1971, focusing on sleep, insomnia, and bright light therapy. He has published over 200 scientific papers and book chapters, presented more than 250 conference papers, and directs the non-drug insomnia treatment program at Adelaide Institute for Sleep Health. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Lack is an active public educator through lectures, media appearances, and his popular book on insomnia. His career integrates research, clinical practice, and innovation to improve public understanding of sleep and body clock health. It is such a privilege to have Professor Lack here on our show today. You can find links to everything we talk about, including Tammy's favorite things for 2025, in today's show notes at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/173. And be sure to stay with me after the interview for additional resources, podcast episodes that expand on today's topics, and our listener shout out for this week. As always, I do want to remind you that the information you hear in this episode is not meant to be considered medical advice, nor is it intended to replace consulting with a qualified physician or other healthcare provider. Now, here is my conversation with Dr. Leon Lack. Thanks so much for being here, Professor Lack. I am so excited to talk to you about circadian rhythm. So welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Tammy. It's a pleasure. It's a nice feeling back sort of on the west coast of the United States where I was born and grew up. And I've lived most of my life now in Australia, but my accent probably does linger on, which would be noticeable.
Yes. In fact, so much so that I didn't even think about the fact that you didn't sound Australian.
When I traveled to Australia, I read a book called Let's Talk Strine, and I tried to take on an accent, but it just didn't hold. And I'm afraid I've been stuck a bit with the North American accent.
I love it. Well, let's start at the beginning. I did mention in the intro, of course, I read your bio and did mention that circadian rhythm is really sort of our body's internal clock. But let's define that a little bit more, since that's really what we're going to be talking about today. What would you say circadian rhythm is? What is that body clock? How does it control everything?
It's a really important area to discuss because I think the general public and even health professionals are not fully aware of the power of our circadian rhythms, the body clock. Calling it the body clock sort of brings all of these circadian rhythms together because any physiological or behavioral measure you could take over a 24-hour period shows variation up to a high point at some point. Like if you take core body temperature, reaches its high point in the late afternoon, early evening. And that's also when your metabolic rate is at its highest, when neurotransmission is most efficient, when people feel most awake and alert, they're at their strongest and fastest in reacting. But then in the later evening, core temperature starts dropping and metabolic rate starts dropping. Neurotransmitter systems change to favor sleep. And so across the nighttime, generally for most of us, we go into a mild, if you like, hibernation phase. I mean, compared to hibernation as a phenomenon in other animals, it's a very small effect. But if you can think of it as that, all of our systems are turned down at nighttime. And so that's the best time to sleep. The body clock and these rhythms are built into us to ensure that we sleep at nighttime and are awake during the day. And I presume that this is developed through evolution because we're not very well suited for behaving around at nighttime. Our vision isn't night vision. We're not very good at smell or hearing compared to our potential predators, like the lions on the plains of Africa. And so it's best if we get our sleep at nighttime and it takes us out of harm's way and into a small family group in a protected environment where we can sleep. And our system has been designed to ensure that our sleep will always be in the nighttime because exposure to light during the day tends to push our body clock such that that low point in the body rhythm is pushed back into the nighttime. Light tends to push that sleep period away from it. So if our sleep period is too early, the evening light will push it later back into the night. If our sleep period gets too late, which is a much more common problem in humans, then the morning light will push the sleep period back into the nighttime. So we have this mechanism that's designed to ensure that our sleep is at nighttime. But most of us don't go to bed until close to the middle of the night, 11 p.m. or even midnight, and then sleep at the very latter part of the dark period. If you think about that, that's a little bit curious. Why do we all sleep at the end of the dark period, not at the beginning or in the middle? And that reflects something really important about our body clock system. In most humans, our body clock rhythm, although it's what we call endogenous in the sense that even if you take us away from all time-giving elements like the sun and darkness, day and night, or clocks, and put us into a confined environment where we could eat and sleep whenever we felt like it and be awake when we felt like it. What happens in those experimental environments, and this has been shown again and again in experimental studies, is that our sleeping pattern tends to delay a little bit every night. So on the first night of this confined, time-free environment, we might go to bed at midnight, but then the next night we feel like going to bed at 12:30 a.m. and the next night at 1 a.m. and then 1:30 a.m. and so on. So our sleep period starts drifting later. It turns out that's true for the majority of the human population. And what that indicates is that our rhythm is a little bit slower than the rotation of the Earth, which is precisely 24 hours. Our rotation of our rhythm is about 24 hours and 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So it sort of lags behind a little bit. We don't show the sort of delay of sleep patterns that people in these confined environments do because we wake up every morning, we get exposed to sunlight, which stops that delay process.
Like a reset or something.
Like a reset. It
Yeah.
sort of puts the brakes on that and it pushes the sleep period back a little bit earlier by being exposed to morning light. And so it confines our sleep period to the nighttime, but for most of us, at the end of the dark period, when light starts becoming available in the morning, is usually the brakes that get put on that lateward drift. So if your audience keeps that mechanism in mind, that'll explain a lot of what happens when people's body clocks become desynchronized to the normal 24-hour period. And that starts producing sleeping difficulties, difficulty getting to sleep because the alert period in our 24-hour rhythm, which for most people sleeping at nighttime, is 6, 7, 8 p.m. in the evening. That alert period drifts later as well, and it becomes 10, 11 o'clock at nighttime. And that's when people are feeling vibrant and alert and productive and happy. And why would you want to bring that to an end? You don't want to. And if you went to bed, then you wouldn't be able to fall asleep anyway. And so, the typical sort of adolescent teenager and everything likes to stay up really late and also likes to sleep in late. That type of process will occur if you don't get exposed to that breaking process in the morning, that morning bright light. So if people spend more time in bed in the morning and, quote, sleep in on the weekends, for example, which is a pretty common problem. It's called social jet lag. What happens is that across the working week, COVID sort of broke that up a little bit. But getting back to a normal schedule in the working week, we have to wake up at a certain time because we have work commitments, maybe, or school commitments, or social commitments, other people we have. So the world starts operating at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, or the shops open at 9. That regular routine occurs. And so we can't sleep in past all these social commitments. So we set an alarm clock to wake us up to make sure that we at least eat breakfast quickly if we feel like it and get off to what we have to do. So that social structure constrains us during the week. But if we're not able to get to sleep until, say, midnight, and we have to wake up at 6:30, we only can get 6.5 hours sleep. And for most people, that's not quite enough sleep. And so we'll build up a little bit of sleep debt. And that sleep debt isn't lost sleep. It gets put into our sleep piggy bank. And it exemplifies us during the day as a slightly sleepier than normal, a little bit tired. And if that happens night after night across the week, then we build up quite a sleep debt towards the weekend that we then like to catch up on our sleep.
Oh, yes. Yep.
How do we do that? It's Friday night and we want to go out and have some fun, so we don't go to bed earlier. And even if we went to bed earlier, we probably couldn't fall asleep, and so it wouldn't be very efficient. So we stay up later, and then we sleep in late on Saturday morning. And we may do the same thing again on Sunday morning. And yes, we get more sleep then on the weekend. That helps pay off that sleep debt a little bit. But the problem in paying off that sleep debt by sleeping in later is that our eyes stay shut for longer in the mornings when that morning bright light break on the tendency of our rhythm to delay is released. And so our rhythms naturally then delay by 15 or 20 minutes on Saturday morning and then again on Sunday morning. And so now we're faced with a body clock on Sunday night that has become half an hour delayed. But I'm talking about the average person. There are individual differences in the length of time that this body clock takes to complete a cycle. It's around 24 hours, but I said for the average population is about 24 hours and 10 or 15 minutes. But there are some people, mainly genetically determined, who call themselves evening types. And they've learned the label, yeah, I'm an evening type. I come alive at 10 o'clock at night and I can't fall
I'm
asleep until
raising my
1
hand
a.m.
over here,
Yeah,
everyone. This is the story of my life. That would be me.
there's a pretty straightforward explanation for that, in that your body clock, Tammy, takes a little bit longer than 24 hours and 10 minutes to complete a cycle and repeat itself again. It may take 24 hours and 20 or 30 minutes to complete a cycle, which means that you have a stronger tendency for your body clock to delay, given the opportunity to delay. And the opportunity is on the weekend when you sleep in late and your eyes stay shut and you don't get any morning light. So on the weekend, your body clock might delay as much as an hour across that weekend. And so on Sunday night, that alert zone, which for you is later than normal anyway, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at nighttime, is now 10, 11 midnight. And so getting to sleep on Sunday night becomes really difficult, but you still have to wake up at 7 o'clock on Monday morning. So you get shortchanged on your sleep again on Monday, and then that continues through the week. And then you try to catch up on your sleep again on the weekend, which you do to some extent, but then you delay your body clock even further. So this becomes a vicious cycle, repeats. And this is really, for a large percentage of population, a continual problem, and they don't appreciate that it's being driven by their body clock, because the body clock and these circadian rhythms, circa means about, dn is a day, these 24-hour rhythms have a very strong influence on when we feel alert and when we feel sleepy.
Oh my goodness. You just described my whole life. Oh my goodness. So, yes, you describing that also just took a lot of guilt away for me, because what you described is exactly what happens to me. I will work really hard, get everything all reset, go to bed at a normal quote time, get up at a normal time. And then over time, it just creeps later and later and later and later. And next thing I know, I'm going to bed at 4 a.m. And then I've got to work to reset it all over again. So I want to tell you one of the things my husband and I started doing over the last month. We had gone on a cruise about a month ago to Alaska. Not a whole lot to do except watch the scenery and eat and play cards and sleep. So we started going to bed a whole lot earlier and getting up a whole lot earlier. And we wanted to keep that when we came home. So we instituted what we call lights out Sundays. So we turn the lights off at, like, I don't know, 6 o'clock or so, which is still later than the sun goes down here in Seattle. And we'll play cards, listen to an audio book, we'll eat dinner by candlelight. And sure enough, we're a whole lot more tired earlier, and it makes going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night so much easier.
That reminds me of a really interesting experiment that was carried out by a colleague of mine at the University of Colorado, Boulder Creek, Colorado. He did a camping experiment with a group of young adolescents who were suffering this problem too, difficulty getting to sleep early enough in the evening on weeknights to get enough sleep by the time they had to wake up to go to school. And so they were always a bit tired, and especially the first couple of periods in the morning, they were sort of drifting off to sleep and really not alert. Almost a complete waste of the first 2 hours of their education, because they will not absorb anything, they'll not consolidate into memory anything. So he took the group of these adolescents who tend to be a bit evening types and a bit phased, delayed, body clock delayed, camping for 2 weeks into the Rocky Mountains, and they were sleeping in these pup tents and everything. And in summertime in the Rocky Mountains, the sun comes up at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, and you cannot close out the light very easily. After a couple of days, they were starting to wake up at 7 a.m. in the morning and starting to go to sleep at 9 p.m. in the evening. So the sun would go down at 8:30. They'd have a campfire and roast marshmallows and that sort of thing and sing a few songs and everything. But they noticed they were starting to get sleepy at 10 p.m. in the evening. I'm going to bed and falling asleep easily. So that shows you what exposure to the outdoor light and outdoor environment will do in helping you to reset your clock. I don't know how long it took for them to get back into their old habits back at school after the camping, but it really illustrated quite nicely. If you get exposed to that morning bright light on a consistent basis, and when you say you turned out all the lights in the evening and, set the alarm clock to get up early and open up your eyes and get exposed to light, the most effective part of that is not so much the evening darkness, but the morning light. The strongest point of influencing whether or not your body clock gets delayed or gets shifted earlier in time is around the point of your core body temperature minimum in the cycle of the core temperature. And for most of us, that point in time where your body temperature gets down to its lowest and your metabolic rate is at its lowest and you're the slowest in on responding to things is towards the end of your sleep period. So about, for the normal sleeper, it would be about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. And after that time, the furnace is starting to get turned back up again. And so by the time you wake up, you're sort of more able to get out of bed and get going. But if that low point in your core temperature rhythm is at 7 a.m., the time that you want to wake up, you really do not feel like getting up. You just want, go away, leave me alone. I want to sleep another 2 or 3 hours. And that seems to be the critical time point, after which bright light tends to shift the whole system earlier, but before which it tends to shift the whole system later in time. So when you get bright light is really critically important compared to the timing of your body clock at present. For example, if you're dealing with a person who really can't get to sleep until 4 a.m. and sleeps happily through till noon the next day, and you say, get up to the morning light, and it happens to be in the middle of the summer, and morning light is at 5 a.m. But if their low point of their body clock is at 8 a.m., and they get exposed to light at 5 a.m., from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., let's say, that's on the side that will cause a delay of their body clock, a very strong delay. So
That's
you have
fascinating.
to be a little bit careful about the timing of your own body clock as to when it's beneficial to get exposed to bright light. But that time point usually is quite late in your sleep period. So the light that you shut out at, say, 7 or 8 p.m. in the evening is a long way away from that critical point. And so turning the lights down there is not going to have nearly as much benefit as turning the lights on after that low point. So that's really what stabilizes the rhythm.
So, how do you figure out what that low point is, like what that point is? Because, I mean, we could talk about like your average person here, but that time is going to be very different for somebody that might be currently going to bed at 4 a.m. So, how do we measure that?
Even the average person who doesn't have as strong a tendency for their rhythm to delay, like you might as an evening type, if you're a person who's just not been exposed to any morning light on a regular basis and whose sleep period becomes more and more delayed, then we give you the same answer at least. How do you determine the timing of your internal body clock? Well, I mean, there are some biological ways, and most of them are expensive and time consuming, so are not really readily available in a clinical type of situation. So I would say the best way is to just experiment a bit with when you feel your ideal sleep period is according to what you feel in your body clock. So in other words, if you're still alert at 2 or 3 a.m. and bouncing around and wanting to have fun and be productive, oh, now I can write that essay that I've always been,
Right.
and you are effective, cognitively effective at that time, that would suggest that's your alert period, which for most people is at 9 or 10 o'clock or earlier in the evening. And that would indicate that your low point is perhaps as much as 8 hours later.
Oh, wow.
If you're saying from midnight to 2 a.m. is my best time, I love it, I'm really productive, then that low point, well, let me do a bit of calculation, probably about 8 hours later. So that low point for that type of person could be as late as 9, 10, 11 a.m. in the morning. So you would have to watch out and be careful not to be too enthusiastic and say, I just have to get up to the 6 o'clock morning light and expose myself to that. But if you do for a couple of hours, you go outside in sunlight and so forth, and then you go back inside into a dark environment, that is a pulse of light that occurs before that low point in your rhythm. And that will produce a delay of your body clock, which is exactly the opposite direction you want to push it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I have so many questions. Okay. We are eventually going to get around to talking about one of my favorite things for this year. Y'all, it's on Tammy's favorite things for 2025, and those are my retimer glasses. But before we go there, I live in Seattle. We talked about this before I hit the record button. Sunset today is at 4:33 p.m. And that combined with the fact that we have more cloudy days than everybody else. If you've seen the movie Twilight, we really are the vampire state. There is not a lot of sun. Going outside even isn't necessarily going to help me. Like all day today, it sort of looked like Twilight out there. So, what do we do with those things?
Again, we were talking about the best timing for the light is depending on the timing of your own body clock and which way you want to move it. You're right. I'm talking about getting outside in the sunshine. This is late spring now in Adelaide, South Australia, and the sun comes up at 5:30 and it'll go down at about 8 o'clock. We're in daylight savings time as well. And so getting sunlight here now is no problem. But agreed, where you are, and for much of North America, winter time can be pretty dismal. Outdoor light, even in the morning, isn't really available until about 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and then you're inside again somewhere instead of outside going somewhere, getting exposed to whatever light there might be, but there's almost no light. Exactly. In those cases, then some form of artificial light will be a substitute. Not as good as a summertime morning light. So the more intense the light, the more effective it is on every exposure to light to shifting the timing of your body clock. So intensity and duration. 5 minutes of exposure is better than nothing. Half an hour of exposure is even better, maybe not 6 times better, but certainly better. So a longer exposure, more intense exposure is more effective. And the color of the light too. Up until about 2000, what was talked about in terms of light therapy and retiming the body clock was broad spectrum white light, it's called. And we know that's what we get in sunlight. And we know that sunlight can shift the timing of the body clock. And so people use then light boxes as light therapy devices. And the light boxes in the early days included incandescent light bulbs, the ones, that heated up and are a bit yellow. Remember those? I don't know if you do.
Oh, yes.
It goes back quite a long way. And then fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights had a little bit more blue in their spectrum, were a little bit more efficient. And so industrial lighting and even indoor lighting went to fluorescent lights because they were more efficient and gave you a better broad spectrum output. But in the early days, we built light boxes at our university in the early 1990s. That is a big array of incandescent light bulbs, high-powered light bulbs behind a translucent screen. And that's where you'd sit and warm yourself up too in winter time because it gave out so much heat. And then we shifted to high-intensity fluorescent lights. But up until about 2000, broad-spectrum white light was recommended because we knew sunshine included that. We knew that sunshine was effective. It was in the late 1990s that I thought, these light boxes are really cumbersome, and they're not very efficient. You've got to plug them into your power outlet, and they may be consuming a kilowatt of electricity. So they're expensive, they're bulky, and you have to sit in front of them. If you turn away from them, or if you walk a few meters away, the effectiveness drops off very, very rapidly. And so you might as well not be wasting your money generating all that light. So we thought there must be a better way to deliver light to the eyes. And it's light into the eyes, not on the skin, which is the effective thing. It has to go through the pupils of the eyes to the retinas of the eyes, where we know that there are specialized, what are called retinal ganglion cells that have a chemical in them, melanopsin, which is specifically sensitive to certain wavelengths of light. And it's those cells that send their neural output up to the major body clock in the brain to tell the brain it's light or dark. And that's located probably about 3 or 4 centimeters behind the bridge of your nose. It's called the hypothalamus, a very, very central, important area of the brain. And that's where the body clock resides. And it gives out signals to the pineal gland to generate melatonin, and it affects lots of parts of the body and helps to synchronize all of the other body clocks in the body. Many of our organs have their internal body clocks. It's like an orchestra. So you have the violin players over here and the drummers over here and so forth, and they all have to be synchronized together if they're going to produce anything that's musical. And the major body clock orchestrates basically all of these external body clocks, so they're all synchronized together. And one of the reasons that you experience jet lag is that the resynchronizing of all these clocks occurs at different rates. And so all of these peripheral body clocks become desynchronized with respect to each other, and you just feel completely out of sorts. And that's probably the reason. And so the major body clock says, come on, I'm waving my hands, get together here, I'm giving the beat. And it brings all the peripheral body clocks eventually back into synchrony again. And then you feel after 3 or 4 days in a new time zone, I'm back to normal.
Or when we change the clocks forward or back.
Yes, that's right. That's right. There's a big issue in North America now amongst the sleep associations. Daylight savings is bad for you. And there is a little bit of evidence that, in the first couple of days after the shift onto daylight savings time, people are basically faced with a 1 hour jet lag situation. Like you flew from the West Coast to the Rocky Mountain time zone, one time zone shift. And now you have to make a 1 hour adjustment. Okay, that's not a big deal. From an Australian's point of view, to get anywhere in the world almost, except Japan, which is directly to the north, we want to go to Europe or North America, we're talking about 6 to 10 hour time zone changes. And so we experience jet lag a lot of the time and have to overcome that. Daylight savings time, going onto it, is like flying eastward by one time zone. And most people should take 1 or 2 days at the most to adjust to that and then back to normal. People like yourself, however, will take a little bit longer because you're already a little bit delayed. And what's required on going on to daylight savings time is a shift your body clock to an earlier time. You're already a little bit too late, and now you have to shift an extra hour back earlier. And so it may take you 2 or 3 days to fully adjust to that. Coming off of daylight savings time, however, you get dessert at the other end, and you could pick up an extra hour, and you could sleep in on that weekend without delaying your body clock too much, according to clock time. Yeah, it's a big issue in the North American Sleep Association, and they want to stamp out daylight savings time. There are some benefits of daylight savings time, and that's the reason people have voted it in. Particularly in Seattle, I would think the best time of the year is in June and July in the summertime, being able to stay outdoors until 8 p.m. in the nice zephyr breezes coming off the ocean and budded nice warm. And that's the most enjoyable time. Now you'd have an hour less of that if you didn't have daylight savings time. So, there's trade-offs there. So people have to decide. The little bit of evidence of detrimental effect of going on to daylight savings time is little, but it's been exaggerated in my mind. We've actually conducted a study looking at later in the daylight savings time period to see if there's any lingering detrimental effect on people's sleep and how they feel during the day. We had a big population survey towards the end of the daylight savings time period, and we had a large number, 450 people who had insomnia, who we also surveyed around Christmas time and New Year's time during daylight savings time, and compared the daylight savings time states in Australia to the standard time states in Australia. So during the summertime, there are about a third of the population stay on standard time, and 2/3 of the population go on to daylight savings time. So we can compare a population sample between those types of states, some on daylight saving, some on standard time, and see if there's any difference in their sleep patterns at all, and on how they feel during the day. The gist of it is we couldn't find anything. There's absolutely no difference except the people in the daylight savings time states go to bed and wake up a little bit later by clock time. But that going to bed and waking up later by clock time is actually going to bed and waking up a little bit earlier by sun time. And they show no evidence of any impairments in their sleep or how they feel during the day and anything like that. So there's no, in our mind, no lingering effect of daylight savings time, for over 2 or 3 or 4 months. But whether or not there's a strong enough effect on the transition into daylight savings time to warrant serious consideration of altering that is really the jury's still out. What we need are objective measures of sleep and objective measures of daytime functioning right across that transition period for the week before transition and the week after, to see how long does that effect really last, how much does it impact, and does it impact some individuals much more than others? And you might say, yes, it does. And in that case, do we change all of the laws about daylight savings time to cater for 10, 20% of the population to make it a little bit easier for them? Or do we concentrate upon them before the transition onto daylight savings time and say, hey, you evening types, you've got to really pay close attention to what you're doing around this transition, because it's going to be a little bit difficult for you. So start shifting your sleep pattern earlier and getting up earlier in the week before that transition to prepare yourself. So a bit of education for certain types of individuals, I think, might be the solution.
Absolutely. And that's part of what we're doing here today. So let's talk about how we get that morning light. I was one of those people that had a light box back in the day. And I got to say, I probably only used it 2 or 3 times because all the things you said, right? It was bulky. I didn't want it sitting around all the time. So I wasn't going to put it away and take it back out. And then just being stuck there in front of it was
Yeah,
so
what can you do?
terrible. Yeah.
You can eat your breakfast. You can perhaps work on the computer if you set up the light box right next to it or something. Yeah, but it's still, it is not amazingly convenient. It's not convenient, and it is very expensive. Anyway, look, I'm sorry, I stopped that story, that historical story in the middle.
No, you're good. You're good.
So can we get back to it?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was me. And part of the reason that I originally was going to be using it was actually for depression because mood has a huge impact as well. But then also for my fibromyalgia, when I was first diagnosed, that was one of the things my doctor had me do was go outside and get morning light, which was fine when I was diagnosed in the spring, not so fine later, right? So I had a client, oh God, it was probably 6 years ago now, maybe, who mentioned the retimer glasses to me. And checking those out, bought myself a pair, and they have been my best friends ever since. I can put them on right over my glasses. I'm going to give you an advertisement here, but for real, put them on over my glasses. I can put them on immediately when I get up instead of like after I do my morning routine because I can wear them when I'm going to the bathroom and brushing my teeth and all the things. And they are a huge factor in me keeping everything where it's supposed to be. And I recently fell in love with them all over again as I worked really, really hard to reset my circadian rhythm because I was actually working on my deep sleep. And it was so interesting to see how morning light affected the quality of my sleep at night in a way I did not expect. So, yeah, let's talk about those.
Well, it's interesting about the deep sleep. I mean, if you are going to bed and trying to fall asleep and are able to fall asleep before that optimal circadian bed, if you like, at the low point of your whole circadian rhythm, then you are falling asleep at not the ideal or most efficient time to get your best quality sleep. And so, in fact, I don't think we have the answer to that from research studies yet. But my suspicion from 50 years sort of in the sleep area is that if you do go to bed earlier than optimal for your body clock, normally that first sleep cycle, 90-minute sleep cycle, has the most deep sleep in it. And then subsequent cycles across the sleep period tend to have a little bit less deep sleep. Deep sleep is sort of indicative that the sleep mechanism is working to its maximum efficiency. But if you go to bed too early, you may be able to fall asleep, but you may not get as much deep sleep in that first or second sleep cycles. And so your overall sleep efficiency in terms of biological benefit may be a little bit decreased. So I think you're right that if you can shift your body clock earlier so that the time that you're going to bed and trying to fall asleep is now at that optimal downslope of your circadian rhythm, your sleep efficiency will be better. And that's still a hypothesis in my mind, but there's a lot of now circumstantial evidence to suggest that regularity of your sleep pattern at the same time every day, which will bring your body clock into harmony with that sleep period, actually improves the overall efficiency of your sleep. And so that 7 hours sleep you get under those conditions is going to be worth a little bit more to you than if you went to bed 2 hours earlier than that optimal period or 2 hours later than that optimal period. So if you can link those things together, your sleep quality will probably be improved. And increasing that deep sleep and that sleep quality has lots of benefits, one of which is the reduction of psychological impact, if you like, of pain. In other words, you can tolerate pain a little bit more when you have more of that deep sleep. And there's some research to support that notion. So that's important. But if I can get back to the historical story of the development of the retimer glasses, So the late 1990s was a time when light-emitting diodes were usually, in computers. It indicated when your computer was on, a little red light over on the side or something. Those were light-emitting diodes, LEDs. And it turns out that they are very efficient at the conversion of electric energy into light. And the technology of that was getting better and better all the time. And in the late 1990s, they had light-emitting diodes of various colors, according to what sort of phosphors existed in these little diodes, these little electric circuits. We had deep blue, blue-green, green, and amber, sort of yellow, orangish, and deep red. So these 5 LED colors were available during that period of time. This is the late 1990s, searching around for some alternatives to these light boxes. And just circumstantially, my daughter, who was about 10 years old at the time, had a bicycle. And bicycles in those times had these little flashing red LED lights at the back, as a warning indicators for traffic, powered by a little battery. And she had put her bike away in the shed. And 3 or 4 days later, I came out and opened up the shed door, and there was this little flashing red light still flashing away. I thought, that's been flashing for a lot of days. That's a lot of light output for a small battery. And so I thought, these things are really efficient. And then it occurred to me, you can get adequate amount of light in your eyes if you have the sun, which is millions of miles away, or a light box, which is 1 meter away, or a very small light source, which is only 2 centimeters away from your eyes. It doesn't make any difference. You can get the same amount of light into the eyes. And so you can reduce the amount of energy required to activate your body clock system by having a small light source much closer to your eyes. And people say, oh, keep that away. But it is a very small light source. And if you put diffusion lenses on it, then it's spread out and it's comfortable, and it's not going to be too much of a hot spot anywhere on the retina. So it would be perfectly safe. So I got down on my hands and knees with this bicycle and came up really close to this flashing red light, and only a couple of centimeters away. And I said, yep, that's bright enough. That'll do. And so I thought, okay, how do I get a good old LED light in their eyes? Oh, well, I can get some glass frames that don't have any lenses in them, and I can attach LEDs to the bottom directed into the eyes. And we can buff down the outside of the LEDs so that you don't get that really concentrated hot spot from the light emitting diode, but you get a more even sort of glowing effect. So that's what we had our technicians at Flinders University do, is to mock up some prototypes, glass frames with two LEDs on each eye, pointed towards the eyes, powered by a little tiny battery. That was all required. You could stick the battery in your pocket. And there we had sort of a prototype of the retimers. But the question was, what LEDs do we use? There are 5 different colors. And white light includes all those colors. And so we still had the question, is one of those going to be better than the others? Maybe they're all equally effective for the same intensity. So went to our engineer technician and said, explore LEDs for us, find the most intense LEDs you can. And he came back with these amber LEDs, which were just new on the market. Said, these are the most intense ones I could find. Okay, buff down the outside of them so that it spreads out the light in a nice uniform sort of way, attach them to glasses, and we will test whether or not we can shift the timing of the body clock. And there already had been biological tests that could identify the timing of the body clock. One of them is, when does melatonin in your system all of a sudden start increasing? And we know that melatonin is secreted by the pineal gland, the back part of the brain, from instructions from the body clock. The body clock says, okay, turn on now. And the pineal gland kicks into action and manufactures melatonin, puts it into the bloodstream. And you can measure it in blood plasma, but that's a little bit dicey. Or you can measure it in saliva, or you can measure it in urine. So a test was devised called the dim light melatonin onset. And so people put cotton pad in their mouth, soak it up with saliva, put it into a little plastic container, put the time on it, and then a half an hour later, do the same thing again. So you start sampling saliva from, say, about 6 p.m. until midnight every half hour. And lo and behold, most normal sleepers, so you had to sleep anywhere from 10 p.m. to midnight, wake up at anywhere from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., will show at some point, will show no melatonin at all in the saliva, zero, for one or two samples. And then all of a sudden, melatonin starts appearing in the sample and goes up very rapidly. And that's called the dim light melatonin onset. And it has to be done in dim light, because if you have bright lights on, the melatonin won't show itself. It gets inhibited by light. Okay, so we have a really precise and reliable marker of the timing of the whole body clock in this dim light melatonin onset. So we measured this in all of our participants, at a baseline night. And then the next night, we gave them these amber LEDs to wear from 10 p.m. till midnight on 2 nights. Then on the following night, we measured the dim light melatonin onset again. And lo and behold, we'd be looking for a delay of that onset point. And that would indicate that the whole body clock's timing has been delayed by that. So we used the amber LEDs, and we did this test very carefully. It cost us a lot of money because we had to send the saliva samples to be assayed, and each assay cost $15, and we had 12 of them for every subject. So it was a big investment. And we got the results back. We're excited to look at it, and we found no change whatsoever.
Not even a little?
No.
Oh, man.
So that showed that the dim light melatonin onset timing was very stable, even across 3 or 4 days.
And that color mattered.
Well, the color didn't matter. It didn't do anything.
Oh, it just didn't do anything at all. Gotcha.
It didn't do
I'm with
anything.
you.
So the timing of the onset point didn't shift at all. It was as if the circadian system had no light at all. It was in darkness. And so we scratched our heads. Oh my God, amber light doesn't work. They were intense because light box studies in the past had shown you can shift the rhythm with only 300 or 400 lux of light. And these are 500 lux. And so we thought, okay, well, if amber doesn't work, some color must work, because we know that broad spectrum light does. So amber isn't effective, but something else must be. So I had a PhD student was looking for a project, and I said, here's one. Test out all of the different colors and as to how they can phase shift the body clock. We know that white light, which includes all of them, can, but amber doesn't. So some of them must. Something must. And so that's what she did. Very, very carefully, did a phase delay, one where we had bright light in the evening from 10 p.m. until about 1 a.m. And then we did the opposite experiment where we had people wake up at 7 a.m. and gave them 2 hours of light from 7 a.m. till 9 a.m. And we looked at the phase advance of the dim light melatonin onset, how much it shifted earlier time. And we tested out the 5 different colors that were available in these LEDs. So deep, blue, green, amber, and red. We already knew that amber wasn't going to work, but we had to put it in anyway, just as a control. And we had a control condition where they had no light at all. And so it was a really carefully controlled experiment to see which colors would phase delay and phase advance the circadian rhythm. And what came out was that, again, amber and red had no effect whatsoever, but green had a bit of effect, and blue-green had a lot of effect, and blue had a lot of effect at both delaying the body clock and advancing it. And almost exactly the same time that we published that first phase delay experiment, a couple of other research labs, one on the East Coast and one in Britain, did studies in which they were looking at the effect of different wavelengths of light, just like we did, at melatonin suppression. So they didn't do actually a phase delay or phase advance and shifting the timing of the body clock, but just used melatonin suppression as an indicator of its biological effectiveness. And what they found was basically exactly what we found, is that the blue and the blue-green were effective, and the warmer colors, longer wavelengths, were almost ineffective and totally ineffective. So that really established around 2000 that the whole system was sensitive to broad spectrum white light, but only because it contains the blue, green, and blue light. And so that's what the retimers are based on. And that's what other mobile ambulatory light therapy classes use, either blue or blue-green light. So is that original research, which pinpointed that. Subsequent to those studies, the mechanism of why blue-green light works better was the discovery of these melanopsin cells that have a pigment which is specifically sensitive to that range of wavelengths, going from deep blue up to through the blue-green area, and totally insensitive to amber and red. So we knew the mechanism then that produced that effect.
That's so interesting. I have actually read some of those other studies you were talking about that were showing that compact fluorescent lights are actually the worst to be using at night if you're talking about the impact on your melatonin. And those incandescent lights are actually a little bit better from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's right. That's when you are concerned about the light exposure you have in the evenings. But as I was saying earlier, that the research is not all that strong on the actual physiological effect of that light in the evening. Remember, that's at least 5 or 6 hours away from the optimal point to cause a phase delay. So the physiological effects of that light, particularly if it's not very intense light from a computer screen or even a television set, you might think it's very strong because in a perfectly pitch black room, it sort of lights up the room a little bit, but really it's only talking about 20 to 30 lux of light. That's really on the very low end. And when it's 5 or 6 hours away from the most potent time to cause a phase delay, then the effects are going to be pretty small. So we need to shift our attention a little bit away from worrying a lot about evening bright light to getting morning bright light. That's by far the most potent and effective way to keep your rhythm stabilized.
Yeah. Okay. So, first, I just want to say I think we could talk for hours about this. I can tell you're probably a pretty popular professor at your school. This is great. But obviously, we do have a limit. So let's talk about how someone could go about shifting that a little bit earlier. We know we don't want to go too early because that can actually make it worse. So, what would the steps be? Feel free to use our example person named Tammy. What would someone do?
Okay, so if on free days, that is weekends, or if you're on holidays and you're just allowing yourself to sleep when you feel like it, or if you have a pretty good idea of when you would ideally love to sleep, when it would be easy for you to fall asleep without too much difficulty, and when you would prefer to wake up when you start to feel civilized again. And just by experimenting a little bit, and from your vast experience of this, on weeknights and weekends and so forth like that, you probably could say, look, if I had my ideal time to sleep, it would be from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. in the morning. Okay. Or a person might say, oh, no, I'm happy. I fall asleep pretty easily if I go to bed at 11 o'clock and I'm spontaneously waking up at 7 a.m. in the morning. Okay, well, then that's your ideal period. Then, once you decide what that ideal or what your body's preferred sleep period is, come back about 2 hours earlier than your natural, if you like, wake up time. And that'll probably be pretty close to that low point of your circadian rhythm. And that low point defines when it would be take cognizance of that and say that times after that, light exposure will tend to push the sleep period earlier, but exposure to light before it will tend to push your sleep period. And if it turns out, just to take an example, if you really phase delay, one of these people called delayed sleep phase syndrome, who can't get to sleep at all until, say, 4 a.m., and who would happily sleep until 1 p.m. in the afternoon, then that low point maybe is late as 11 a.m. in the morning. And that type of person should not expose themselves to strong light in the earlier morning. that'll be counterproductive and make it even worse for them. So that's what a person would say, okay, well, sleep in on the weekend and wake up spontaneously. Okay, maybe it's 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Then get outside in the sunshine for at least a couple of hours. Go for a walk. Don't wear your sunglasses. Get as much visual light exposure as you can at that time. I would also say something about melatonin, but that might be for another story. Light exposure is by far the strongest, what's called Zeitgeber or phase changer, timing changer. Melatonin can still be effective and useful in the opposite way. Melatonin early before your sleep period can help draw the sleep period towards it. That is, if you take a quick release, not a sustained release melatonin, you take it at least 4 or 5 hours before that ideal sleep period, that'll help pull the sleep period towards the time of administration, and low dose too. People have the wrong idea about melatonin. Melatonin is not like a drug or some other substance where the more you take, the stronger the effect. With melatonin, if you take a high dose, like 5 milligrams or greater, it'll hang around in your system long enough to cause a counterproductive effect the next morning. So you want a small dose. 1 milligram is more than enough. Half a milligram is still effective. Take it at least 4 or 5 hours before that ideal start of sleep period, and that'll have the effect of pulling the sleep period towards it. But bright light has a stronger effect of pushing the sleep period away from it. So both those things in concert should be doubly effective. But anyway, bright light is a stronger effect than the melatonin. But melatonin's easy to take, and it's available over the counter, I understand, in North America. But low dose and quick release. If it's a sustained release, then melatonin can end up still in your system past that low point in your circadian rhythm. And at that point, it causes a phase delay. The timing of the light and the melatonin is important to understand. Okay, so taking this example of the person who's naturally sleeping from, say, 4 a.m. to 1 p.m., then get up maybe a little bit earlier than normal, maybe at noon, and get outside in the sunshine, or at least in as bright a light as possible for at least a couple of hours, and do that on a regular basis, and then start shifting a little bit earlier, 15 or 30 minutes earlier every couple of nights. It'll take a while to shift your sleep period. It might take a whole week or a week and a half to shift it back to where you want it to be, but it should work. And that's where the retimers can come in handy if it's rainy, cold outside, or it's not very, you don't have very good sunlight available.
Winter in Seattle, I'm not going to get what I need outside.
No, that's right. And the obvious explanation for winter depression, which a lot of people suffer, and particularly people who tend to be evening types, I think, is based on the mechanism that as you go into winter, you get much less morning light available, and you're less likely to go outside into it anyway, whatever light is available. Even cloudy days can be effective, but if it's cold and rainy, you won't go outside. And so the idea is that as you go into winter, you get much less intense light in the morning, and the breaking of that light to a phase delay tendency is not as strong. And so your rhythm becomes a little bit more delayed, which means that if you have to wake up at a certain time in the morning on weekdays, you don't get as much sleep as normal. So you start getting sleep restricted. You try to catch up on your sleep on the weekend. That just phase delays you further. So you get into this vicious cycle. And so it's suggested that morning bright light can be effective, and that can then lead to depression, because your whole life is now become chaotic to some extent. You're not as productive. You're feeling a bit blue. The Monday blues.
Yes.
That's been a phenomenon for a long time. And the ready explanation that people have is, oh yes, well, the weekend is nice because it takes the pressure off, and now you have to get to work on Monday. Horrible work. Well, that's not true for everybody. A lot of people enjoy the work and everything, but still experience Monday blues. I had a sociology colleague here at the university I had conversations with, because he studied this effect in terms of suicide rates. And he had this great population data that shows that the suicide rate is higher on Monday than any other day of the week. And it's also high on Tuesday and Wednesday. It starts dropping across the week, and it's lowest on Saturday, and it starts going back up again. And I thought, gee, that sounds familiar. It sounds like social jet lag a little bit here. And maybe Monday morning blues are to some extent caused by the lack of sleep on Sunday night because the person's become so phase delayed that they can't get to sleep till 1 a.m. and get short-strained to sleep. And they're waking up at the low point of their circadian rhythm, facing the world for the beginning of the week. And they just say, oh, God, I can't face that.
Not with enough sleep. Yes. Oh my
Yeah, that's right.
goodness.
That's right. And at your lowest point in your body clock. Um,
Yes. Yes. There are so many times. I tell you what, I often will fly back east, not as much as I used to, but for a while there, I was flying back east about once a month. And not only am I going 3 hours earlier, but also like the people over there just live on an earlier time than I do because being my own business, right? I can sort of structure things so it works with my natural tendency to be later in the day. So here I am having to be at a meeting at 9 a.m. East Coast time, which is 6 a.m. my body clock time. That's the middle of the night.
and that's at your low point of your whole rhythm. And so you're having to deal with people at a real disadvantage.
Yes.
I sometimes suggest to business people and even politicians, if they're flying overseas from Australia to Europe, for example, tell them when to schedule meetings for them, which is as early in the morning as possible in their destination in Europe, because it'll be the middle of the day for them. It'll be early morning for the others, and they'll be advantaged to some extent in any sort of negotiations or dealings.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. I love that. So if somebody starts doing this where they're working on moving their body clock earlier, how long does something like that take? Is that very individualized for how long it might take somebody to move their clock forward, let's say 2 hours earlier in the day? Or is there kind of something we can expect for how long that might take?
We don't really have the research evidence to support this, but my guess would be that yes, there are individual differences, and the more evening type of person they are, the more difficult it is to shift your clock earlier. And for a given amount of light intensity at the ideal time in the morning after your wake up, you'll get a little bit less benefit from it. So it'll take a little bit longer. And because you're probably a little bit more delayed to begin with, then it's a
Right.
great clock time to span over. So, I mean, if you're talking about an example of a person who can fall asleep eventually at, say, 12:30 at night and would prefer to sleep until 9 o'clock in the morning, then we're talking about getting up, say, at 8:30 or 9, getting exposed to at least a couple of hours of light from, say, the retimers or outside light, or at least a couple of hours, and shift that a little bit earlier by 15 or 20 minutes every morning. And so they might be talking about a week it'll take to shift the body clock earlier by, say, 2 hours so that they're falling asleep at 11 o'clock and waking up at 7.
Got it. All right. Awesome. As I'm talking to you, I keep thinking about my husband because he is better in the morning, but I have noticed that like he'll shift a little bit later too. Like his clock is definitely a little bit longer than the sun cycle. I'm thinking I need to buy myself the newest version of the retimers and give him my old ones.
Or if you're really nice, you could let him choose because he might like the older versions, which are a little bit more 1980s
Yes. I call them my space
spaceship.
glasses.
Yeah.
Actually, I was going to ask you this. Is there really any difference between the two? I mean, in terms of benefit and function and all of that, but
No, functionally, we were very careful to make them exactly the same. So the same intensity, same distance away from the eyes, same color of LEDs. So functionally, they should be exactly the same. It's just the styling is different. They're smaller in size. They only sit on the lower part of your nose. They fold into a much more compact package. So if you wanted to use them to get over jet lag, then it's much easier to take them and put them in your shirt pocket, really, and pull them out and put them on without having this quite voluminous box that they come in. So they are really ideal for overseas flights and overcoming jet lag. And they probably look less imposing, I guess. So outside or in the plane as you're flying overseas, they're less scary. But
Yeah.
normally people use them indoors before, in the mornings, before going
Yeah.
outside. I have had a few patients. I still have a clinical practice and treat people with insomnia. And there are some people who have the opposite problem to yours, which is they don't have any problem falling asleep at all. In fact, the last couple of clients I've had have been early morning awakening insomniacs. They go to bed at 10 o'clock, which is late as far as their body's concerned. They're starting to get sleepy before that, and they struggle to stay awake until 10. Go to bed and fall asleep in 5 minutes at 10 o'clock, but then wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning
Yeah.
and have a lot of trouble getting back to sleep again. And in their case, their body clock has shifted earlier, and they're waking up earlier and unable to resume sleep because their body clock is on the upswing and saying it's morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. And after they've had 5 or 6 hours of sleep, which satisfies most of their sleep need, their body clock now is telling them it's wake up time and they can't get back to sleep again. So they need to have their body clock phase delayed by an hour or two so that they can sleep in later. That doesn't stop them from falling asleep still at 10 o'clock, but it means they're able to sleep longer in the
Yeah.
morning and get more total sleep time. They're much more rare than the phase delayed evening types. And that is probably due to their body clock being a little bit faster. Their body clock may repeat a cycle in 23 hours and 50 minutes, let's say, not 24 hours, 15
Right.
minutes.
Right.
And
Right.
so they have a tendency to shift a little bit earlier and earlier and place their sleep at the beginning of the night rather than at the end of the night, like most of us do. And so they can be helped by evening bright light a few occasions. And that uh, we've done research with these sorts of people and shown that, yes, it can be clinically beneficial for them.
So would they do
So
then just basically the opposite? They would wear it at night instead of in the morning. Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Would you wear it for or be exposed to, I guess, like shorter amount of time? Would it be the same amount of time? Like how would that look different?
The longer you use it on each occasion, the stronger the effect it has on each occasion. So if they don't want to spend, 2 weeks with half an hour of light in the evening, they can spend 1 week with an hour of light or an hour and a half of
Right.
light in the evening. It may have a tendency for their body clock to, once they stop using light therapy in the evenings, for it to start creeping a little bit earlier gradually over time. And so they might need to get evening light once or twice a week just to push it back later again to keep it in the right location for when they want to sleep.
Yes, yes. And that reminds me, one question I want to make sure I ask you before we wrap up here. For those of us who need to use it first thing in the morning, if we do, for whatever reason, sleep in, do we still use them because we've woken up later, or do we not use them because we've woken up later?
No, no, you can still use them. Just the effect is likely to be not quite as strong because it's a little bit further away from that optimal area of phase advancing, which is 2 to 3 hours after that low body temperature point. So the further you get away, and that is the later in the morning, it'll still have some beneficial effect. It just won't be as strong. So if you accidentally slept in, yeah, still use them in the morning. And
Good.
in fact, I'd suggest at first, that if you're trying to catch up on lost sleep, I'm usually a bit sympathetic to people and suggest, yeah, you don't have to wake up at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning or Sunday morning. Wake up at 7:30 or 8. Use the retimer glasses at that point. It'll still be of some benefit. But again, if it's summertime, get outside in the sunshine, go for a walk, plan outdoor activities like the camping experiment that was done, Rocky Mountains. That is the most effective. But you're faced with a long winter and dismal overcast days. So there's plenty of opportunity to use the retimer glasses instead of
For
being
sure.
outside in the cold and the rain.
Yes, exactly. In the summer, I'll go on my deck that faces east and look at the mountain.
Yes, get that morning sunshine. Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds perfect.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, as we wrap up here, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that people know in regards to all of this?
Wow, we talked about a lot. And I just would really like people to understand the strength of the body clock and how it affects our sleep and alertness across the 24-hour period. I I had a PhD student who then subsequently went on to be have his own research laboratory. This was in the 1990s, and he was getting frustrated at the fact that we have lots of legislation about protecting people against dangerous things like drinking and driving, and you can lose your license, and get fined heavily if you're caught with excessive blood alcohol levels when you're driving. So we take that very seriously, but we don't take very seriously people who are just sleepy and are likely to drive off the road and kill themselves and somebody else. Just as like, if not more so, than a person who's over the legal blood alcohol level. But there's almost no attention to that. So anyway, in the 1990s, he thought he'll devise an experiment to show the strength of going without sleep. And he took the same group of participants and he had a cognitive performance task. It was sensory motor task, like driving, and you could objectively measure performance on that test. And he ran the test in the afternoon at different blood alcohol levels. So he fed them more and more vodka across them, and you can see the deterioration of the performance, particularly when you get to 0.08 to 0.1 blood alcohol levels. I don't know how he got it through the ethics committee. That was the old days.
Exactly.
So he measured performance under alcohol conditions, and then he measured performance across the whole day and into the night without alcohol, perfectly free of alcohol. You just measure the circadian rhythm effect and the effect of going without sleep. So he found that as you went into the nighttime, and particularly around midnight and later, performance started dropping, on this cognitive performance test, suggesting that if you're driving a car, you would be less proficient at doing so. And it got worse and worse and worse. And the worst performance was about 7 a.m. in the morning, about 24 hours after having woken up the previous day. So 24 hours of sleep loss was interpreted as causing this really detrimental performance. It was accepted for publication in Nature, a really prestigious academic and scientific journal. And it's been cited over 1,000 times now. So it's used a lot of the time. Look, if you go without sleep, it's as bad as being drunk in terms of performance. And it's the first one that did that. Subsequent studies just replicated those findings again and again. But what he didn't report, which I'm trying to make more available to people, is the fact that he went on testing people until noon the following day, 30 hours of sleep loss. But he had 2 or 3 more measures on this cognitive performance test. And what happened was that 7 a.m. was the worst performance, but lo and behold, 2 hours later at 9 a.m., they were better. And at 11 a.m., they were even better again. And so at noon the following day, their performance was only marginally less than at noon the previous day, whereas they had been awake for another 24 hours. So the effect of sleep loss is not as large as the effect of the circadian rhythms on performance.
Yes.
And so, but it
Yes.
has been interpreted forever as the effect of sleep loss. So people think, oh, if you go without sleep, it's really damaging. It's as bad as being drunk in terms of performance. No, it isn't the sleep loss. It is the circadian rhythm effect, which is stronger than the sleep loss.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's so
So
good.
the message should be, you should get enough sleep. That does have some input to performance, but you shouldn't be driving your car at 7 a.m. in the morning if you've been awake for 24 hours. So that combination is devastating. Here in Australia, we have long distances between places, and there's a lot of driving on country roads over great distances. And so maybe a third of road deaths are single vehicle accidents, it's called. Just the car runs off the road or runs across the white line head on into somebody else. And clearly is a result of a person just falling asleep and losing consciousness. So that's a big issue. But it's not caused entirely by sleep loss. It's caused more by driving at the wrong time.
Yes. Oh my goodness. That makes me think of all the people with shift work where it changes all the time. We see that most commonly in our medical professionals, right? You never know when you're going to be working. Don't we want people working when they're actually going to be functional? Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not want to have an operation at 7 a.m. in the morning by a doctor that's been awake for 24 hours. Oh my God.
No.
And the medical profession of any people should know that this is really counterproductive and it's damaging to the doctors and it's more damaging to the poor patients. Why they can't construct a reasonable shift work system, I think it can only go back to some sort of notion. Oh, we had to do it, so all the young doctors have to do it too. It's sort of like a rites of passage or an initiation ceremony or something like that. It's just bull. It's just, they should be setting a good example, and they are setting a
Yes.
terribly bad example.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I definitely want to have you come back and actually just flat out talk about insomnia. We have so many people who have trouble with insomnia, both just being able to fall asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, waking up and not being able to go back to sleep. But that's a whole nother conversation.
It is. It
So
is.
we will talk about that offline. But thank you again so much for being here. This was great.
No, thank you, Tammy, for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
And that wraps up my conversation with Professor Leon Lack from Flinders University and the Adelaide Institute for Sleep Health. I don't know if you can tell from the lighting if you're watching the video, but it has gotten completely dark during my conversation with Dr. Lack. So here we are. It's 5:30 Seattle time and it is night. We will definitely be having Dr. Lack back out on future episodes to share more about his work with insomnia. If you were listening like I was, you can tell he's got a lot of expertise to offer on that particular subject as well. So we will definitely be having him back for that. If today's episode has you curious about trying the Retimer Light therapy glasses for yourself, you can find them along with all of my other favorite fibro-friendly tools for 2025 in Tammy's Favorite Things. I will link everything for you in today's show notes at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/173, where you can sign up to get a copy of this year's list. That list also, when possible, has some discount codes, and it does have links where you can purchase everything. If you'd like to go deeper on improving your sleep, there are 2 other episodes I want to recommend for you. Episode 95, Sleep Better with Sylvan Penn. This is a great look at healthy sleep habits and practical tips for getting better sleep. And then the episode right after it, episode 96, Fibromyalgia Sleep, I actually take a step beyond what Sylvan shares to give you some fibro-specific tips and explain why fibro sleep is just so tricky. So you'll find that in episode 96. Again, you'll find links to both of these episodes and everything that I mentioned today at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/173. I also want to let you know, in case you've missed it, we have started a new blog and online magazine, the Fibro Compass. So if you want more science-backed articles, practical tips, personal stories, we've got those out there as well. All of our articles are written by graduates of my Certified Fibromyalgia Coach training program. These are all real fibro people who are also experts and helping others with their fibromyalgia. Go check out the Fibro Compass. It is designed to help you find direction, feel supported, and move towards living a life you love. You'll find that at fibrocompass.com. You'll also find a link in today's show notes. And now I've got this week's listener shout out for you. This one comes from Marty, and I thought this was particularly appropriate because she lives on the Gold Coast of Australia. So we're going to keep it all Australian today. Marty says, your podcast has been a savior as I listen to it on the drive to work and home. It's about an hour each way. You are amazing, and I love your podcast, and I tell everyone about it. Thank you so much, Marty, for those kind words. And thank you for sharing the podcast with others. When you guys do that, it's so awesome because obviously you know people I don't know. And when you share it, it helps to expand that reach and to help people that I wouldn't have been able to help otherwise. So thank you so much for that, Marty. And thank you for being part of our community. Thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tammy Stacklehouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.